She vanished while she was sleeping. Those were the first words spoken by a desperate mother on the morning of June 5, 1986, when she discovered that her 4-year-old daughter had disappeared from her own bedroom. No noise, no witnesses, just silence, and the front door wide open. Little Jessica Gutierrez was last seen sleeping beside her older sister. The next morning, there was only one bizarre and disturbing detail. The sister said a man with a beard and a magician's hat had taken Jessica in the middle of the night. The case, which happened in the quiet town of Edmund, South Carolina, stunned the community. But as the years passed, frustration took over. No solid leads, no body, and most importantly, no one held accountable. Why did the police ignore the obvious evidence? Who was the real culprit? And the most disturbing question of all, where is Jessica? It wasn't until 35 years later that the truth finally came to light, and it shocked the entire nation. But to truly understand what happened that night, we need to go back to the beginning. But first, make sure you're subscribed to the channel so you don't miss powerful true crime stories like this one. Jessica Suzanne Gutierrez was just 4 years old, a sweet girl with a bright smile and curious eyes. She lived with her mother, Debbie, and her sisters in a modest home in the rural area of Edmund, a small community in Lexington County, South Carolina. Back in 1986, Edmund was the kind of place where people left their doors unlocked and neighbors knew each other by name. Jessica usually slept with her mom, but on the night of June 4th, she asked to sleep with her 6-year-old sister, Rebecca, in their shared bedroom. It was a normal night. Nothing suggested that something terrible was about to happen. Debbie, exhausted from a long day, went to bed without any worries. In the stillness of the night, the house felt at peace until morning came and her world fell apart. When she woke up, Debbie noticed the front door was wide open. The family dog was roaming freely inside the house, something that never happened. When she checked the girl's room, her stomach dropped. Jessica wasn't in bed. The living room window screen had been ripped out and papers were scattered across the floor. It was a scene of confusion and something worse, an invasive, chilling presence. Rebecca, scared, said she had seen a bearded man wearing a magician's hat taking Jessica during the night. The description seemed too strange to be true, but deep down, Debbie knew her daughter had been taken. Within minutes, the house was filled with screams, despair, and a crushing sense of helplessness. What had seemed impossible in such a small town had just happened. A child had disappeared from inside her own home. And as news spread and the investigation began, the entire community was gripped by fear and anger. But what police found that morning raised more questions than answers. It was just after 6 a.m. when Debbie Gutierrez made a panic call to police. The disappearance of a 4-year-old girl in the middle of the night triggered a full-scale alert for Lexington County investigators. Within minutes, patrol cars surrounded the family's home. Upon arrival, officers quickly noticed signs that something was very wrong. The living room window screen had been carefully removed, no signs of breakage, as if the intruder knew exactly how to enter without making a sound. Papers were scattered on the floor, a half-smoked cigarette was found near the entrance, and another empty cigarette pack was left in the yard. Inside the house, nothing had been ransacked. Nothing had been stolen. The only target was Jessica. As police gathered information, Debbie, in shock, tried to recall the details of the night before. The image of her daughter going to bed with her sister blurred with the unbearable thought of what might have happened to her. Then Rebecca, only 6 years old, made the statement that would mark the case forever. A man with a beard and a magician's hat took Jessica. At first, the description seemed like a child's fantasy or a bad dream. But as investigators listened more closely, they noticed consistency in the details. Rebecca had woken up in the middle of the night, seen the man standing beside the bed, and terrified, had hidden under the covers until she fell asleep again. Police theorized that the magician's hat might actually have been a cowboy hat, something that could easily appear strange or pointy in the dark to a child. But that small detail would complicate the identification for years. In the following days, community-wide searches were launched, with volunteers combing fields, rivers, and nearby roads. Flyers with Jessica's face were spread across the state. The case attracted media attention and federal resources. The FBI joined the local police. But despite the strengthened investigation, leads were scarce. Detectives began mapping potential suspects, and the first name to come up was Debbie's ex-boyfriend. They had recently broken up, and he had a history of controlling and aggressive behavior, but he had a solid alibi and was ruled out. Another suspect was Jessica's biological father. He lived out of state and was not involved in her life, but he was still investigated. His whereabouts on the night of the crime cleared him of any involvement. With no concrete evidence and time passing, Debbie's anguish only grew. She pressured the authorities, insisting they follow her instincts and pay more attention to the signs being overlooked. But with no definitive proof, the police began treating the case as an unsolved disappearance. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and slowly, the case faded from the news. Debbie, however, never gave up. She believed the person responsible was closer than police wanted to admit, and maybe she was right. 6 months before Jessica's abduction, a man had done small repair jobs at the Gutierrez home. He was known to frequent the neighborhood, always wearing a cowboy hat and sporting a thick beard. A man who had once seemed kind, but who now haunted Debbie's memories. His name was Thomas Eric McDowell, and soon he would no longer be just a vague memory, but the prime suspect in the case. The name Thomas Eric McDowell began to gain traction when detectives learned he had worked as a handyman at the Gutierrez house about 6 months before Jessica disappeared. He was a 27-year-old man with a record car theft and would later be linked to assaults and rape. He matched Rebecca's description perfectly: thick beard and cowboy hat. When questioned, McDowell claimed he had never returned to the house after finishing his work. But one detail caught the investigators' attention. His fingerprints were found on the outer frame of the window the abductor had used to enter. To Debbie, this was definitive proof. But for investigators, it wasn't enough. McDowell's defense argued that he could have left those prints during his previous work at the house months earlier, and since the window hadn't been cleaned, there was no way to prove exactly when the prints were left. Despite the strong suspicion, McDowell wasn't arrested. Debbie, furious, started her own investigation. Years later, she discovered fibers in McDowell's old car that she believed matched Jessica's pajamas. Once again, the police dismissed it. In 1987, McDowell was arrested for sexual assault in another state. A cellmate claimed McDowell had confessed to abducting and killing Jessica. But McDowell demanded full immunity in exchange for a confession. With no body, no new evidence, and immunity denied, the case went cold again. It wasn't until 2021, with a new sheriff in town and renewed FBI support, that the case was officially reopened. A 50-agent task force reviewed evidence, statements, and forgotten leads. This time, the fingerprints were reanalyzed and confirmed to be recent at the time of the crime. The confession was formally validated. Witness accounts about McDowell shaving his beard and ditching the cowboy hat shortly after the crime supported the prosecution's case. A new analysis also linked the cigarettes found at the scene to McDowell's smoking habits. In January 2022, Thomas Eric McDowell was finally arrested, but the trial would bring even more revelations. McDowell's trial, held in 2024, was filled with powerful emotions and heated exchanges between the prosecution and defense. Prosecutors presented every piece of evidence gathered over 35 years. Fingerprints, the inmate's testimony, cigarette traces, and suspicious behavior patterns. The defense argued the fingerprints could be old, that the sister's testimony was unreliable due to her age, and that the lack of a body made a conviction impossible. But the jury had no doubts. Thomas Eric McDowell was found guilty of first-degree murder, kidnapping, and home invasion. He received 2 life sentences without the possibility of parole. Jessica was never found. McDowell has never revealed where he left her body. But for the Gutierrez family, the conviction marked the end of an era of silence and neglect. Jessica Gutierrez was only 4 years old. She never got the chance to learn how to write her full name, to go to her first day of school, or to make friends in class. Her life was stolen by a man who walked free for more than 3 decades. And even after the conviction, the location of her remains a painful mystery, an emptiness no sentence can truly fill. For Debbie, the fight was not just for justice. It was for dignity, for memory, for respect for the daughter she loved. She not only endured the trauma of losing a child, but also the coldness of system that failed her time and time again. Jessica's case reveals a harsh truth. The negligence and mistakes made in the early days of an investigation can cost not only the resolution of crime, but families' very hope. Today, Debbie and Rebecca keep Jessica's memory alive. And if there's any real justice in this case, it didn't come only from a guilty verdict. It came from a mother's unrelenting strength, and a sister who, even as a child, witnessed the unimaginable and had the courage to speak. Now, it's up to us to never forget. If this story moved you in any way, leave your thoughts in the comments below. Cases like Jessica's must never be forgotten, and talking about them is a way to honor those who couldn't speak for themselves. Subscribe to the channel for more real stories that need to be told, and share this video with someone who needs to understand what it truly means to fight for justice.